My name is Antha Williams. I am head of global environmental programs at Bloomberg Philanthropies. And I'm joined today by Ted Danson, the incredible author, environmental advocate, and actor, who is joining us from quarantine. So Ted, tell us where you are. What's going on there?
Yeah, I'm in beautiful Vancouver. Because my wife, Mary Steenburgen, is about to start shooting Zoe's Extraordinary Playlist, the second season, because the numbers up here, COVID numbers, are much better here in Vancouver. So come Monday, she's off and running. And we're in quarantine for 2 weeks until we get the all clear sign. So I'm zooming a lot.
Well, that's excellent. We appreciate you zooming in from your quarantine headquarters, and we're looking forward to this conversation about your work on oceans.
Thank you for having me here, because back at you. I know that you and the Bloomberg Philanthropy, you guys are so smart about how you make use of your money. I am a huge fan of how strategic you are. So, it'll be fun to talk to you.
That sounds great. Well, you're best known, obviously, for your roles on the screen, from Sam Malone on Cheers, where you were nominated for a bunch of Emmys and won them, and your more recent work in Fargo and The Good Place, and my personal favorite is George Christopher on Bored to Death, which if people haven't watched, they definitely should. It's an amazing show. But I'm sure you have gotten approached about working on a lot of issues over the years. So how did you get into oceans conservation? Why this topic?
I do think that the fact that I grew up in Arizona and we'd go visit cousins in Southern California and spend a month on a beach, in a little cottage someplace, was my favorite time growing up. Had something to do with it. Pardon me. The fact that my father was an anthropologist, an archaeologist, and a director of a museum, which meant he was surrounded by, and our family was surrounded by scientists all the time. None of that, I was playing with my friends, so none of that sunk in. But I do think that somehow it got into me that anthropological point of view of there's a lot that's come before us, and there hopefully will be a lot that comes after us. And this time that you're here on the earth is not just about you. It's about your stewardship of what you've been given. And I think that sunk in. Then I moved into a neighborhood in the middle of the Cheers years, sometime in the mid 80s. And there was a fight going on, a neighborhood fight to keep Occidental Petroleum from slant drilling into the bay, Santa Monica Bay. They wanted to put 60 wells up. And we all got together and found a way to defeat them. And Robert Solnick, who was the head of the organization, and I enjoyed each other's company so much and the subject that we kind of naively started an organization called American Oceans Campaign. And we ended up with 2 or 3 lobbyists in Washington and several scientists on our board. And this was in 1987. And it gathered some respect, and awareness, so that when Oceana was founded in 2001, they asked us to merge. So here I am on the board of directors of Oceana, which is now the world's largest ocean activist group that focuses solely on oceans. And and we're a campaign organization. So I'd love to talk about that. But that's how I got here. And I think really on a personal level, it's probably more like, hey, Dad, I may be an actor, but I'm at least hanging out with people who are like you. So I'm sure it has some sort of like childhood thing that's in there as well.
I love that. I love the story of coming together with other like-minded people to oppose the threat around offshore drilling. And I know that's something that that Oceana is working on a lot, mobilizing coastal communities, especially around the United States, but also around the world,
Yes.
against
Yes.
the threat of offshore drilling. And it's an interesting one because it's it's not just typical environmental activists who are motivated on that issue. A lot of times it's really about people, seeing the threat in their own community, whether they are Republicans or Democrats. And so I wondered
Right.
if you could say a few words about that work that you and that Oceana have been so deeply engaged in.
Sure, absolutely. We do have, we're a campaign-driven organization where our whole point of view is to change policy nationally around the world to put more fish in the ocean so more people can eat. And yeah, the overall kind of 1,000-pound gorilla in the room is climate change, as we all know. And so not only are we fighting to keep offshore oil drilling off our coasts because we know what the risks of spills are. You can't clean up. You can get the oil off the surface, but once it's in the water column, it's there forever, and it has a huge impact on the fisheries. And then you start talking to people who have businesses, restaurants, whole towns survive off of tourism because of their beautiful beaches. And all of a sudden, if you start talking to people about the risks to their way of life and to their businesses, you can gather quite a coalition around the idea that offshore oil drilling is in environmentally sensitive areas is just the wrong thing. Besides the fact that we should be, desperately trying to get off of our dependence on oil, because climate change is just going to wreck everything. Literally, it will undo everything we have been doing for oceans, if it goes unchecked. So, yeah, we've had great success. Our work actually enabled us to convince the Obama administration that opening up the Atlantic coast was not a good idea. And this is bipartisan, Republicans and Democrats up and down the coast, political people in political positions, businessmen, women. It is literally it has nothing to do with what side of the aisle you're on. It just makes sense, It just makes business sense.
That's right, economic sense, and I like your point about how interconnected these issues are. When you think about major threats to the oceans, it's really, climate change is the biggest threat to the world's oceans,
Yes.
Along with overfishing and pollution, and those are kind of the three issues that Oceana and your advocacy has really focused on. It does, your point about, and I will say it's been in the news this week, right? To your point about this being a kind of bipartisan issue where President Trump reversed himself and backed off of opening Florida and Georgia and South Carolina to oil drilling, to leases to big fossil fuel companies just this week. Not coincidental that those coastal governors, right, don't want to see that in their waters. Were you surprised by that news?
Yes, I mean, nothing surprises me much anymore, but yes, I was surprised, and it is a victory. It's a good thing. I don't know how much of it is political. I don't know how much of it would stick after the election, if Republicans stayed in office, because I hate to bring politics into it quite so early into this conversation, but by and large, the administration and the leadership, without doubt, has been saying climate change is a hoax. They don't believe in the science. So I'm a little suspect, when it comes to this. But it's a victory nevertheless, and it's a good sign. I would encourage this administration to make that, all around the coast of the United States, not just into areas that are, well, I don't know if I should be saying this, but that's my opinion, that it's quite possible it's a political move more than an environmental move.
Yeah.
You can
Yeah.
edit that out if you'd like.
But interesting, right? And relevant that with voters in these critical places,
Yes.
drilling off their coasts is incredibly
Yes.
unpopular. Nobody wants that.
Yes.
Um,
No.
and uh, and so that's of course relevant for the work. One
I find it sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I think, an environmentalist's job is to frame the argument, the conversation in whatever way communicates to people who may not be agreeing with that issue. So it's our job to talk about climate change and oceans, not just from doing the right thing for the critters and doing I think it's easy to dismiss this kind of work as you're a tree hugger. As opposed to, no, what we're talking about is creating more jobs, for real. We will create more jobs when you stop overfishing and you start, not using those huge trawlers that destroy so much of the bottom of the ocean floor and then ruin our nurseries. If you do it correctly, then you are creating more jobs. You will have a resource that will be sustainable forever. And if you do it correctly around the world, you can feed 1 billion people a fish meal every day if you could quantify landed fish that way. So now you're talking about world hunger. You're talking about letting the oceans be managed so that they can do their part in fighting climate change, because you're not going to cut down as many rainforests to grow something, to feed something, to make a pig or a cow that then contributes to methane. So it's a really solid economic argument besides just doing the right thing for the environment.
That's such an interesting point, and you've been very pointed in your oceans work that you actually want to save the oceans in order to feed the world. It's not just a matter of coral reefs or beautiful places, though that might be an important part of our environmental legacy, but it's really about livelihoods and feeding people. And I think people are sometimes surprised to hear, somebody who's working to protect the environment talk like that.
And not everyone agrees. I know several people who I respect hugely, who don't necessarily like the idea that we're taking fish out to eat them,
Yep.
But no matter what, to create an abundant ocean that's capable of feeding the world, you have to do the same things that if you were just caring about making biodiversity increase and getting pollution out of the ocean and taking care of the ocean just as an entity as in itself. You would be doing the exact same things that we're doing even though our intention is to help feed the world. I think it's one of those things where we've stuck our finger and messed into the universe so much that you can't just take it out and say, let's just be pure. No, it has, I think all hands on deck, including the ocean, the ocean needs to help feed us now, for many reasons, besides just feeding us, but also to take stress off of land animals and to help fight climate change.
Yeah, I know a lot of people are surprised by a statistic that I've heard before from Oceana, that the difference between eating a hamburger and a fish-based meal, just that difference equals an average American commute every day, that you could avoid by that difference. So it is that sort of data-driven approach to some of these solutions. It's, as you said, perhaps not about purity, but about doing things slightly better to operate more sustainably into the future.
Yeah. And so many people, you can then kind of edge over into racial injustice because so many people who are very poor in the world depend on fish and fishing, in an artisanal way, and depend on fish for their lives. And so many of those people are women and people of color. So, You know, I swear, if you were just to, this is my little opinion, if you were just to focus on doing the right thing for the oceans, you would literally clean up so many of the issues that we're facing and dealing with today, if you honestly did everything you were supposed to do.
That's so interesting. And one of the things I think has been that I've been compelled by in some of how I've heard you talk about this work in the past is that protecting the oceans doesn't require doing everything. You know, there's a few basic things in a few key places you can do to make a really big difference. And so, you know, that could be banning the most destructive fishing gear, you know, protecting the most important habitats, and setting scientific limits on how much fish can be caught. It's like, you know, it might feel really complicated or overwhelming, but if you just did those things, it would have a huge impact on protecting the abundance of those for the future.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you think about, oh, save the oceans is like, what? It's huge. How can you possibly? That's a silly thing to say. But Oceania, I'm going to say Oceania. Environmentalists are pack animals, so this is Oceania probably giving me something to say. Forgive me, I will turn this off. When I say Oceania and I realize that environmentalists are pack animals. We all show up to get things done. So forgive me if I'm stepping on any toes, but Oceania, to repeat what you just said, discovered that if you stop overfishing by doing those three things, you know, you stop destroying the habitat, the nurseries, because that, you know, it just makes sense. And then you stop being wasteful by throwing overboard. 1/3 of the world's catch is thrown overboard by fishermen, because usually the huge trawlers, because it's not the fish they were after, or it's the wrong side. So it's very wasteful and very destructive. And if you don't let science lead the way, then you won't know how many fish to leave in the ocean so that it is sustainable. And a lot of time, finances, and I have to pay off my boat, and from a political point of view, I need to keep fishermen and happy. They make decisions that aren't science-based. If you do the science and you let it lead the way, you will have abundant oceans. You will have fish coming back where they had been fished out. I mean, it just makes perfect sense. And sorry, I'm rambling, because I also want to draw a connection to what we're learning in this country right now. That if you let politics lead the way as opposed to science with something like COVID-19, which is nature, which is, you know, like climate change, it's just real. You may not like it. It may terrify you. It may be overwhelming. It may not be politically expedient, but it's real. And if you don't let science lead the way, then you will never have a chance at succeeding and protecting yourselves. So anyway, I hope that's a lesson learned.
Well,
I did go off topic.
No, but since you mentioned it, I mean, it is a good question. If you think about the incredible threats that we're facing right now, you know, a pandemic, an economic recession, the specter of global climate change, the, you know, wildfires and hurricanes that we're seeing now, and the reckoning over racial and economic injustice and inequity. You know, how does work to save the ocean fit into that? How do you think about ocean conservation in that context?
It is, to me, the same conversation. It is literally the same thing. And when you have people saying it can't be done, it's too overwhelming, and climate change is not real, or it's just too hard to tackle, so don't even try. I can almost guarantee you that that is spin coming from oil companies and petrochemical companies. I'm sorry, I know that's kind of, no, that's true. That's just true. You know, the science that says this is not real, you know, is this, and that kind of thinking is the same thinking that says, well, no, racial, you know, there's no problem with, with race in this country. You know, I'm not my brother's keeper. I got mine. You figure out how to get yours. It's all that same kind of expedient. Don't tell me how to lead my life. Let me do it my way. That is preventing climate change, which gets in the way of creating more jobs by doing the right thing environmentally, which keeps people from going, wait, racial injustice is holding us all back. You know, it's that same thought. It's the same package. And,
Yeah,
you know,
please
saving,
continue.
sorry, go on,
No,
sorry.
please continue.
Well, you know, climate change in oceans is easy, I think. You know, you offshore oil drilling, stop that. It creates more, you know, greenhouse gases anyway, and when you have spills, it destroys oceans and livelihoods along the coast. So stop doing that. Protect mangrove uh, because you know they are able to sequester carbon in the earth underneath those mangroves. You know, do an amazing amount of taking carbon out of it. Stop fishing and harvesting kelp forests without some sort of regulation, because that takes carbon out of the atmosphere as well. So there are so many things that oceans do that tie directly into climate change, like stop overfishing, because if you do it correctly, you can provide 1 billion fish meals a day, which means you're not going to cut down so many rainforests to grow something to feed a pig. You're not going to also use so much water that you need to do to feed that, grow that pig, because so if you think of fish as the perfect protein and you protect that and you make the oceans safe to be abundant, you're doing a lot for climate change. Yeah, there you are. Jobs. Do it correctly, and you create more jobs. You know, you will create more jobs with clean energy that can stay and has to stay in the United States because of the nature of what you're building and making. You all know this. I mean, you guys at Bloomberg are amazing at supporting all of these initiatives, and you've been doing it for so long. And you've been, even in the midst of this, we don't believe in climate change. You've been supporting mayors and cities across the United States to keep doing this work. So it's ready to be done, you know, and it is possible. We have examples of all of this working. We just need to, you know, stop that greedy, don't tell me what to do point of view, you know.
It's really resonates with how Mike Bloomberg thinks about this work and ocean protection, where it's this combination of policy change at the government level to get the scale of change that we need, so that people in the course of their lives and going about their business are rowing in the right direction. You know, that's what policy change enables, combined with the work at the local level in communities to engage people, you know, to make their lives better. And then combined with the financing, you know, bringing in the money for long-term sustainable solutions. You know, if a local fisher person in the Philippines is getting more money per fish because they have access to cold storage and can move at longer distances, you know, those changes coming together really can create some of these enduring solutions.
Yep, and technology will play into it. There's so many things that will play into it once we all shift our point of view to, yes, we can. We actually can deal with this. It may not be, you know, going back to what it was like in the early 1900s in the environment on this planet, but we can tackle this. We can keep it from being a disaster that we hand to our grandchildren.
One of the things that Oceana has been really involved in is just providing the data for better decision making by governments and by business leaders, and as part of that effort, helped create an organization called Global Fishing Watch that's providing a lot of the making use of the technology. Can you just talk a little bit about the importance of that work?
Yes, I mean, you work very hard to make sure that Belize, for example, has no more trawlers out there, and they're not using gill nets and drift nets, and you do all these things that for a small they do it. They create this. Oh, we've done the right thing for our oceans, and then along comes another country or illegal fishermen, and how do you police that if you don't have a navy or so you can have all these rules and regulations, and there are lots of wonderful ones out there, but how do you enforce it becomes a very big question. So Oceana and Google, and I think it was called SkyTruth, a satellite company, got together and created something called Global Fishing Watch, which is, and if you go on Global Fishing Watch, anybody, you don't have to pay for it, you can see any ship over 300 tons, and that number's going down to smaller ships, any ship over 300 tons on the water by name, and you can see where they've been in almost near time. So maybe it's an 8-hour, 10-hour, something delay. But that means you can watch such and such ship in the Philippines, coming to a no-fish zone that the Philippines have established, and it starts to zigzag. It slows down, and you watch it zigzag, and maybe you even watch them turn off their satellite. What is it? ALS? I can't remember the name of the technology. Right. Right. They turn it off so that they pretend like they're not there, and then they turn it back on. You can watch bad actors in almost live time. Then you can show up at the harbor. You may not be able to make it stick legally, but you show up at the harbor and you go, you're fishing illegally, and then you go to the insurance companies that insure these big ships, and you go, hey, you guys are insuring illegal fishing, and a lot of times illegal fishing is also doing slave trade or arms or drugs or all sorts of bad things. They're really bad actors. So all of a sudden you have this tool that anyone can make use of. So you have millions of eyes on your little patch of sea saying, whoa, over there, somebody's doing something wrong. So it's really kind of brilliant. And that was technology coming together for an environmental benefit. And I think we're going to see more and more of that happening.
Well, Ted Danson, you are an incredible actor. You've been an incredible advocate for oceans protection through your work with Oceana. Do you have some parting words for us?
I would say what excites me also is the fact that there are the Greta Thunbergs out there in the world, that there are people, children, kids, younger people in the streets. I'm encouraged by that energy of no more. I would encourage my experience, having started as a younger person and enjoying throwing verbal bricks at the establishment, when the truth is so many of these things are so complicated. You really need to let science lead the way. You need to really focus on changing policy. So if we can combine the energy of the people who are in the streets and are angry about what's happening to our climate with people and organizations that are in the business of changing policy to make things better, that excites me a lot. It excites me that we are talking about Black Lives Matter, because to me, it's not a leap to talk about climate change. It's that same energy that we need, and we need to support, and especially if we can focus it into changing policy, because that's where you make a difference. And also, please vote. Please vote.
That's a great message to deliver with only 7 weeks to go before the U.S. elections here and early voting happening in many places. Ted, we at Bloomberg Philanthropies have been so proud to partner with you on your efforts to protect the environment and the world's ocean. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. Really appreciate all you do. And this was a fun conversation. Thank you.